It started with a scream. Not the kind you hear in a horror movie, but a real, raw scream that tore through the gray cement walls of Columbia Correctional Institution like a jagged knife. Inmates froze mid-step. Guards dropped their coffee cups. Somewhere in cell block C, a man, bloody, broken, but still breathing, was being dragged across the floor. That man was Jeffrey Dahmer. But the most shocking part wasn't that someone had tried to kill him. It was what he whispered before losing consciousness. Words that chilled even the coldest officers to their bones. He wasn't human. He came for me in the shower, and I let him. That was 2 days before he died. And nobody ever asked what really happened inside that shower. Until now, 8 days earlier, Jeffrey Dahmer's days were always the same. Wake up to the loud metal clank of the prison doors. Get a scoop of eggs so rubbery they bounced if you dropped them. Clean the chapel with Christopher Scarver, the guy who didn't talk much. Then spend hours reading the Bible in his cell like he was trying to wash something off his soul. To most people, Dahmer was just another prisoner. But the guards noticed strange things about him. He hardly spoke unless spoken to. He refused visitors. He kept a cardboard cross taped above his bed. Some inmates whispered that he had nightmares that made him scream at night. And once, a rookie guard swore he saw Dahmer talking to someone invisible in the corner of the laundry room. No one believed the kid. But things started getting strange a week before Dahmer's death. On a stormy Tuesday, lightning crackled outside the prison walls. The power flickered off and on again. When it came back, the security cameras glitched for 3 minutes and 36 seconds. When the footage was restored, the only thing out of place was Dahmer, standing still in the middle of the chapel, soaking wet, even though he had never left the building. "Did you go outside?" one of the guards asked him. Dahmer didn't even blink. "No, he did." "Who's he?" Dahmer just smiled. The next day, Dahmer requested to see the chaplain. The chaplain, a kind man named Pastor Keaton, met with him in the prison chapel. The door was locked behind them. No one knows what they talked about. But when Keaton came out, he was pale, shaking, and refused to ever meet Dahmer again. The official report said, Pastor Keaton has chosen not to continue spiritual sessions with inmate Dahmer. But the truth came from another inmate who overheard Keaton whisper to a guard, "That man, he isn't repenting. He's preparing." That Friday, Dahmer was given kitchen duty with Christopher Scarver and another inmate named Jesse Anderson. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. It wasn't, according to the logs. The three of them were left alone for just 22 minutes while the guard stepped out to make a call. In that time, something happened. Something nobody could explain. The kitchen was trashed. There were dents in the walls. Broom handles snapped in half. Blood on the floor, lots of it. Jesse was found slumped under a sink, unconscious. Scarver was standing with a metal bar in his hands, breathing hard. And Dahmer? He was lying in a pool of blood, barely alive, whispering nonsense about a shadow with yellow eyes. Then he passed out. But that's not what the public heard. The news said Christopher Scarver snapped, that he killed Dahmer and Jesse because he couldn't stand being around them, that it was revenge, hatred, insanity. But nobody ever looked deeper. Nobody asked why Dahmer's last words were, "He's not finished with me yet." 10 days earlier. Now, let's go back to where it really began. It was a quiet Monday in Columbia Correctional. The guards were bored. The air was heavy and hot. And Dahmer was sitting alone in the chapel, drawing crosses in the dust with his finger. He had been doing that every day for weeks. One guard joked, "At this rate, he'll convert the devil." But that day, someone new entered the prison. A man dressed in a dark suit. No name tag. No clipboard. No ID. He asked to speak to only one person, Jeffrey Dahmer. No one knows his name. No one saw him enter or leave. But after that visit, Dahmer changed. He stopped drawing crosses. He stopped sleeping. He started watching the hallway from his cell all night, whispering, "I know you're out there." And on the fourth night, he carved a word into the wall above his bed using a fork. The word was Golgotha. That's the place in the Bible where Jesus was crucified. The guards laughed it off at first. But that same night, the prison's fire alarms went off, even though there was no fire. Just smoke. Thick, choking smoke that made it hard to breathe in Dahmer's block. When the smoke cleared, someone had drawn a symbol on Dahmer's cell wall. A perfect circle with a single black eye in the center. And Dahmer was curled up in the corner, rocking back and forth, muttering. He's watching me through the wall. The guards moved him to a different cell. But it didn't help. That night, another inmate screamed that Dahmer was floating above his bed in his sleep. And the next day, the guards found dozens of dead flies in Dahmer's sink, even though no one else had seen a single fly in the entire block. That was a low point. No one wanted to be near him. Even the guards felt uneasy. People began to wonder if something dark was following him. But Dahmer wasn't scared anymore. In fact, he looked peaceful, like he was waiting for something, or someone, back to the day of the attack. Dahmer was scrubbing the tiles in the prison gym when the lights flickered again. Scarver and Anderson were nearby, cleaning equipment. The guards were laughing in the hallway, talking about football. Then the lights went out completely. In the dark, Scarver heard something, breathing, but it wasn't Dahmer or Anderson. It was something heavier, slower. Then Dahmer stood up, dropped his mop, and whispered, "He's here." What happened next was never recorded. The cameras had stopped. The guards didn't come back for another 20 minutes. When they did, Anderson was bleeding. Scarver was yelling. And Dahmer was on the ground, shaking violently, eyes wide open, but not seeing anyone in the room. His mouth moved, but only one word came out, over and over. Golgotha, Golgotha, Golgotha. The story ends there, for now, but the truth? It's just beginning to unravel. Because someone or something came for Jeffrey Dahmer, and it didn't come to punish him. The prison security footage from the day of the attack is recovered and reviewed by a curious young tech officer. What he sees in the frame is not human, and it's not alone. It came to collect. A week after Dahmer's death, the prison was almost back to normal. The inmates laughed in the yard again. The guards stopped double-checking the chapel doors. The chapel itself had been cleaned, the walls repainted. To most, the whole thing was over. But for Jeremy Holt, the youngest tech officer on staff, the nightmare had just started. He was the one who found the missing footage. It had taken days to recover. The power outage during the attack had corrupted several files, including those from the gym cameras. Holt, curious and a little obsessed, dug deeper into the backup drives. On a forgotten server labeled CC Inactive 93, he found it. A 3-minute video file named C block_gym_raw_112894.mov. It was dated the exact day Dahmer was attacked. His hands shook as he opened the file. What the video showed. At first, it was nothing unusual. The camera, high in the gym ceiling, overlooked the tile floor. Dahmer was seen scrubbing the corner of the shower area. Scarver was cleaning the far wall. Anderson stood near the bench press. Then, the screen glitched for half a second, and something changed. Jeremy paused the video, rewound it, played it again. It wasn't just a glitch. There was a figure, black, tall, thin. It stood in the far left corner of the room, just behind Dahmer. Only it wasn't there before the glitch. It appeared suddenly, like it had stepped in from somewhere else. Jeremy leaned closer. The figure didn't move like a man. It flickered like a flame, but in reverse. It didn't reflect light. It seemed to drink it in. And the most terrifying part was its face. No mouth, no nose, just a single, glowing yellow eye in the middle of its head. Jeremy froze. Dahmer turned toward it. His lips moved. The creature raised its hand. And then the screen went black. When the feed returned, Dahmer was on the floor, blood pooling around him. Scarver stood, panting, the metal bar in his hand, and the creature was gone. Jeremy slammed the laptop shut. His heart was racing. He looked around the empty control room. He was alone, or so he thought, because on the monitor beside him, the one that displayed live feeds, something moved in the chapel hallway. A flicker, a shadow, gone in a blink. That night, Jeremy took the footage home. He knew he shouldn't. It was against protocol. But something told him this couldn't stay in the prison system. He needed answers. So he watched it again. And this time he noticed something new. Right before the glitch, the moment before the creature appeared, Dahmer looked up directly at the camera as if he knew, as if he was expecting it, and whispered, "Come and see." 2 weeks before the attack, back in Dahmer's cell, everything had changed. He had stopped asking for food. He barely drank water. Yet somehow he remained strong. His skin, once pale and sickly, began to glow with a strange warmth, almost like a fever. His hands shook when he touched the Bible, and he had stopped sleeping. Other inmates noticed. One even reported hearing chanting from Dahmer's cell at night. Strange, low chants in a language nobody recognized. The guards laughed it off. Probably Latin, one said. The guy thinks he's a monk. But Christopher Scarver wasn't laughing. He had started watching Dahmer closely. He didn't like how the man never blinked anymore, how his eyes would stay open in the dark, reflecting the hallway lights like a cat's. Scarver wasn't a religious man, not anymore, but he knew evil when he saw it. And Dahmer wasn't alone. One night, Scarver saw it. He had gotten up to use the toilet. He passed by Dahmer's cell, and there, standing inside with him, was a tall, black figure, not a shadow, not a hallucination, a thing. And Dahmer was talking to it, like it was a friend. Scarver told the guards. They laughed. Then he told the chaplain. The chaplain's face turned white, and then he vanished. Pastor Keaton turned his badge the next day and moved to a town 6 states away. He left a single note on the back of his Bible. He made a deal, and now it's time to pay. Back to the present. Jeremy couldn't sleep. The video looped in his mind. He had told no one. Not yet, but he needed help. He opened a dusty folder in his basement. It was his dad's old case files from the FBI, back when his father used to investigate cult activities. He flipped through pages until he found one that made his blood run cold. It was a hand-drawn symbol, a circle with a single black eye in the center, the same one from Dahmer's wall. The folder labeled it, Watcher of the Eye, a forbidden god from pre-Christian texts, associated with possession, human sacrifice, and soul marking, believed to appear during moments of intense guilt or spiritual collapse. Underneath, a note from his father. If you ever see this symbol in real life, run. Jeremy stared at the paper. The eye seemed to stare back. And then, from upstairs, he heard a sound, a slow, dragging step. Then another. Something was in his house, coming down the stairs, and the power went out. Jeremy Holt, the only person with the footage of the shadow figure in the prison, is not alone in his house. As something begins moving toward his basement in the dark, his laptop lights up on its own, playing the footage of Dahmer's final moments on a loop. Jeremy Holt stood frozen, a flashlight trembling in his hand. The sound above him had stopped. Whatever was in the house had reached the basement door. The only light came from his laptop, still playing the footage over and over. Dahmer kneeling on the prison gym floor, whispering to the black figure, then collapsing. Jeremy's breath caught in his throat. And then the door creaked open. He pointed his flashlight upward. Nothing. No shadow. No sound. But something was wrong. The air was thick, like walking into a room full of smoke, only there was no smoke. Just a feeling that something ancient, something wrong, was watching. He turned back to the screen, and the video had changed. A new frame in the footage. Instead of the normal ending, Dahmer lying in a pool of blood, there was a new frame now. Just one. Exactly 1 second long. It showed a black screen, but in the center was a yellow eye. Still, open, blinking. Then the file crashed. The laptop screen went dead. And in that silence, Jeremy heard it. A voice. Soft, dry, like wind scraping across a grave. Come and see. 3 days before the attack, Dahmer's warning. In prison, the days dragged like chains. But for Jeffrey Dahmer, time had started to bend. He wasn't sleeping anymore, not because he didn't want to, but because something wouldn't let him. The thing that visited him each night stood at the end of his cot, whispering in that same dry voice. You were chosen. At first, Dahmer thought it was guilt. He deserved the nightmares. He welcomed them. But this was different. He wasn't dreaming. The shadowy figure left behind marks. One morning, he woke up with black dust in his hands. Another day, the Bible on his desk had been rewritten. Every verse crossed out except for this one. And the eye of judgment looked upon him and saw no soul. He tried to warn the guards. They laughed. He tried to tell the chaplain. He disappeared. So Dahmer turned to the only man who never smiled, Scarver. Scarver's last conversation with Dahmer. They met in the laundry room. No guards, no cameras. Dahmer approached slowly, like a man stepping toward a mirror that might shatter. I need to tell you something, he said, voice low. Scarver didn't respond. He folded towels with cold precision. It's coming. I thought it was just guilt. I thought maybe this is what hell feels like. But it's not hell. It's something else. And it wants me to give it the others. Scarver turned. The others? Dahmer nodded, shaking. It feeds on us, on what we've done. It told me if I let in, if I stop fighting, it'll give me peace. No more screaming. No more nightmares. Then don't let it in. I already did. Scarver's hands clenched into fists. What does it want now? Dahmer's voice cracked. You. Back to Jeremy. The knock at the basement. The flashlight flickered. The air felt colder now, like the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. Jeremy slowly crept toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier. The laptop remained black, but the yellow eye was burned into his vision. He reached the door and listened. Silence. Then a knock. Not from above. From inside the basement. But he was the only one down there. Right? His heart thudded in his ears. He stepped back. Then the knock came again. 3 sharp taps. He looked toward the breaker panel. Maybe if he turned the power back on, the lights would return. He ran for it and flipped the main switch. The lights flickered and came on for 1 second. Just long enough to see the shadow figure standing across the room, tall and still, its yellow eye locked on him. The lights went out again. Jeremy screamed and ran. Up the stairs. Through the kitchen. Out the front door. He didn't stop running until he reached his neighbor's porch and pounded on the door like a madman. Mrs. Kilgore, old and wrinkled, answered in a robe. Jeremy? What's gotten into you? It was in the basement. It was in the footage. Dahmer, there's something wrong. Her face slowly changed. Her eyes narrowed. And she said, he called it. And now it's found you too. 2 days before the attack, the visitor, back at the prison, a strange thing happened. A man in a dark suit arrived. He had no ID badge, no name tag, but the warden let him through like he was the governor himself. He went straight to Dahmer's cell. The cameras cut out. No one knew what they talked about. But when the man left, Dahmer was sitting on his bed, a peaceful smile on his face. He looked up at the ceiling, whispering, "It is done." Scarver saw him that night in the cafeteria. And Dahmer was different. Not scared. Not broken. Calm. He walked like a man who had finished his sentence, who no longer cared what came next. He ate slowly, stared at the exit door, hummed a strange tune under his breath, one no one recognized, but one that made the hairs on the back of Scarver's neck stand up. And then he said, aloud, "They think death ends it. But for me, it's only the beginning." Back to Jeremy, what the FBI folder revealed. After catching his breath and convincing Mrs. Kilgore to let him stay the night, Jeremy finally dared to reopen the folder. He had missed something before. Taped to the back of one of the pages was a photograph. It showed a young Jeffrey Dahmer, 12 years old, at a church youth camp, standing in front of a strange painting, the same yellow eye. Below the photo was a note from his father's handwriting. Subject number 049. Exhibited signs of early exposure to the watcher. Behavioral decay began after contact. Possible generational tie. Investigate bloodline. Jeremy's jaw dropped. This wasn't just a prison haunting. This had started long ago. Dahmer had been marked as a child. The watcher wasn't haunting Jeffrey because of what he did. It had been waiting for him to become what he did. Final day before the murder. Scarver had had enough. He told the guards, "If you put me in the same room with that man again, one of us won't walk out." They ignored him, said it was good for the cameras to show the two cleaning together, made them look reformed. Scarver didn't sleep that night. He prayed, for the first time in years. And when dawn came, he stared at the crack in his ceiling, because the eye was there now, watching and whispering. Back to Jeremy, a new visitor. The next morning, Jeremy received a package. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. He plugged it in and found one file, a video labeled Dahmer_tape.mp4. He played it. It showed Dahmer, sitting in his cell, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, it means I failed. Or maybe it means you're next. The thing that came from me, it doesn't care about forgiveness. It feeds on what we bury, what we hide. It is not a demon. It is not a ghost. It is the final truth." He leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It is inside the walls now." Suddenly, the screen went black, and a new message appeared, typed in blinking red letters. As Jeremy stares at the screen, his laptop melts into black goo, and the yellow eye opens in the center of the keyboard. The house begins to shake, and a voice, familiar now, whispers again, "Come and see." Everything fades to black. Jeremy Holt watched in horror as his laptop melted into a pool of black goo. From it, a yellow eye blinked open. The house began to shake violently, and that dry voice echoed through the walls. "Come and see." And then, darkness. The awakening. Jeremy jolted awake. He was lying on the floor of his living room. The house was quiet again, the walls still. His laptop was gone. Not damaged, gone like it had never existed. In its place was a sticky, dark smear on the floor, like something had been pulled into the wood. For a long moment, Jeremy didn't move. Then he slowly turned his head and looked up. Written on the ceiling in red letters, no paint, but something wet, were the words. Chapter 4, The Portal in the Walls. And below that, "He came through. Now it's your turn." Jeremy scrambled to his feet. He ran to the front door, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. The door wouldn't open. He twisted the knob, kicked it, screamed, but the house held him in. Every window, every exit, locked, frozen, as if the house had become part of the trap. Then he heard the whisper again. Closer now. "Come and see." A door that wasn't there before. Jeremy wandered from room to room in a panic, until he noticed something strange. In the hallway, where there had never been a door, one now stood. Old, rusty, covered in carvings that looked ancient, lines that twisted into the shape of an eye. He didn't want to open it, but something inside him whispered, "You have to." He reached for the handle. It was warm, almost like it had a pulse. When he pulled it open, he expected a closet. Instead, there was a hallway made of stone, stretching far beyond the bound of the house. The walls were covered in drawings. Some were of prisons, some were of children, some of Jeffrey Dahmer himself, screaming, mouth open, as the yellow eye consumed him. Jeremy stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Flashback, Dahmer's final hour. Inside the prison laundry room, Dahmer scrubbed the floor like he had every other morning for months. But this time, he was humming again. The same tune from the cafeteria. Christopher Scarver entered behind him. The camera above blinked red, recording, but there was no live feed. Only later would they find that this hour of tape was erased from the system, replaced by static and a single image. The yellow eye. Dahmer didn't look up. He simply said, "It's here." Scarver said nothing. He was gripping. "I saw in my dreams," Dahmer continued. "But this isn't a dream anymore. It's real now." He turned and looked at Scarver. "I'm ready." Scarver raised the iron bar. But before he could swing, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. A sound came, like wind howling through bone. And then Dahmer spoke again, but it wasn't his voice. It was layered, deep, not human. "He is mine." Scarver swung. There was a crack. Blood sprayed the floor. But instead of screaming, Dahmer laughed. And when the lights flickered back on, his face was still smiling. Inside the portal, Jeremy walked slowly through the stone hallway. The deeper he went, the colder became. Not cold like weather, but cold like emptiness, like the walls had never felt light or warmth. He passed another drawing. This one showed him Jeremy, standing in front of the same door he had just opened, and beside him, the shadow figure resting one hand on his shoulder. He turned away, heart pounding. The whispers were louder now, and from ahead he could hear something breathing. He turned a corner and came face to face with the Watcher's chamber. The Watcher's chamber. It was a round stone room, lit by no light, yet Jeremy could see everything. There were thousands of eyes carved into the walls, all yellow, all watching him. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it a photo album. Jeremy stepped forward. He opened the album, and inside were pictures of every victim Jeffrey Dahmer had ever taken. Polaroids. Gruesome. Real. He flipped through them, disgusted, until he found the last page. And there, taped into the album, was a photo of Jeremy himself, asleep in his bed, dated 3 nights ago. Beneath it, scribbled in red ink, "You were always part of the story." He dropped the album and backed away. The walls began to pulse. And then the pedestal sank into ground, replaced by a staircase. Scarver's vision. Christopher Scarver was locked in solitary confinement after the murder. He never spoke of what happened, until one day, a priest came to visit. Scarver's eyes were bloodshot, but his voice was steady. "You ever seen someone leave their body?" he asked. The priest shook his head. Scarver continued. "When I hit him, I saw it happen. His body died. But something else crawled out of him. Tall, black, with a single yellow eye. And it looked right at me. Not like a ghost. Like it knew me. Like it had been waiting." He leaned forward. "You think I killed him?" The priest nodded slowly. Scarver whispered, "I didn't. I just opened the door." Jeremy descends the stairs. The staircase led deeper underground than should have been possible. The air grew thick. The walls changed from stone to flesh, beating, alive, and still eyes everywhere. Jeremy stepped carefully. Every few steps, he passed mirrors, but they didn't reflect him. They reflected Dahmer, not in prison, but as a child, as a teen, then as a man surrounded by darkness. Each reflection whispered a different phrase. It starts again. "Tell them the truth. You were chosen." The Watchers remember. At the bottom of the staircase was a door made of bone. Jeremy didn't want to open it, but the voice from within spoke once more. "Come and see." He opened it. The feeding room. The room beyond was vast. At the center stood a long table. And seated around were people, figures with no faces, wearing prison uniforms. Each had a photo in front of them, a victim, and at the head of the table, Jeffrey Dahmer, smiling, but his eyes were no longer his. They were yellow, alive. He looked at Jeremy and spoke. "You made it. I was hoping you would." Jeremy stepped back, horrified. "You're dead," he whispered. Dahmer tilted his head. "Are you so sure?" The figures at the table turned, one by one, and Jeremy saw that they weren't strangers. They were him, copies, each one a version of himself from different stages in life, all with one thing in common. Their eyes had turned yellow. Dahmer's deal. "You don't understand, Jeremy," Dahmer said gently. "This wasn't my punishment. It was my purpose." Jeremy shook his head, trembling. "You murdered people." Dahmer nodded. "And the Watcher fed. It used me to wake up. It made me its door. And now," he spread his arms, "you're the next door." Jeremy screamed and ran back toward the bone door. It slammed shut behind him. The room darkened. Dahmer's voice echoed. "It can't end now. Chapter 5 is coming." And then every figure at the table stood up and began walking toward Jeremy. Drop of blood cliffhanger event. As Jeremy backs into the corner, The Watcher itself descends from the ceiling, unfolding from the shadows like a spider made of smoke and bone. Its yellow eye locks on Jeremy, and it says, "Tell the world what you saw, or become part of the next feeding." The room explodes into darkness. Jeremy entered the Watcher's realm through a mysterious door that appeared in his hallway. He saw Dahmer seated at a long table surrounded by soulless copies of himself, all with yellow eyes. The Watcher, an ancient being with a single yellow eye, descended upon him with a terrifying choice. Tell the world what you saw, or become part of the next feeding. And then the room exploded into darkness. The awakening again. Jeremy's eyes flew open. He was lying in his own bed. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. For a brief, beautiful second, he thought it was over. Then he sat up and saw that every wall in his bedroom was covered in writing, his own handwriting, scrawled in red ink, over and over. The Watcher is real. He feeds through the story. Jeremy stumbled out of bed. His body was drenched in sweat, his throat dry like sandpaper. The door to his room creaked open by itself. From down the hallway came a smell, rotting wood and burnt metal. That's when he noticed something even worse. He wasn't alone in the house. There were footsteps, but not walking, pacing, back and forth. In the attic, slow, deliberate, like someone was waiting. The house that wasn't built by man. Jeremy grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the attic. He had to know. But when he pulled down the hatch and climbed up, he didn't find dusty boxes or insulation. Instead, he stepped into a hallway he'd never seen before. And just like the stone portal underground, this one wasn't made of wood or nails. It was made of meat. The walls pulsed gently. The ceiling was lined with tiny eyes. The floor? A long tongue. As Jeremy walked, it squished beneath his feet. He gagged, but he didn't stop. He followed the pacing sound until he reached the doorway. Etched into the top of it were the words, "The house that is hungry." He pushed it open. The hungry house. Inside was a perfect replica of Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home. But the photos on the walls were wrong. They showed Jeremy's parents, Jeremy's baby pictures, Jeremy's bedroom, but with Dahmer in it, sitting on the bed, smiling. The pacing stopped. From behind the couch, a man stood up. Jeremy gasped. It was his father, but his eyes were yellow. And when he spoke, it wasn't his voice. "You've always lived here, Jeremy. Don't you remember?" Jeremy backed away. No, this isn't real. You're not him." The father thing tilted its head. "But it will be. Soon." And then it lunged, chased through the mind maze. Jeremy ran back through the hallway of flesh. The walls began to ripple, the eyes on them blinking furiously. He turned a corner and fell, right through the floor. He tumbled in blackness, landing hard in a new room. This one was white, hospital white. He stood up, dizzy. All around him were doors. Each door had a name. One said Tracy Edwards. Another said Stephen Hicks. Another said Christopher Scarver. And the last one, bigger than the rest, said Jeremy Holt. He opened it. Inside the door, the room beyond was his own memory. Jeremy saw himself, age 12, hiding in his closet, crying. Outside the door, his parents were screaming. That was the night his father left. The night Jeremy wished someone would come and make it stop. Then Dahmer stepped into memory. He sat beside 12-year-old Jeremy and whispered, "This is where I found you." The adult Jeremy screamed at the scene. "Get out of my head." Dahmer turned to look directly at him. "You let me in, remember?" And suddenly the closet door closed, trapping adult Jeremy inside. Meanwhile, Scarver speaks again. In the real world, Scarver sat in a cell, mumbling. A guard passed by and paused. "You all right, Scarver?" Scarver smiled. "Jeremy Holt. He's almost ready." The guard frowned. "Who?" Scarver looked him dead in the eyes. "The next host." Jeremy in the closet. Jeremy pounded on the door. It wouldn't budge, but behind him, something was breathing. He turned around. The closet wasn't small anymore. It had stretched into a tunnel. At the far end, yellow light glowed. He had no choice. He crawled toward it. Each step forward, the space grew warmer. The breathing got louder. When he reached the end, he found himself in the mouth. The mouth. The room was a giant dome. The walls were teeth. The floor, a tongue. And above him, a giant, glowing I stared down. The watcher. Jeremy fell to his knees. I'm not him. I'm not like Dahmer. The watcher blinked. No, you're different. That's why you'll last longer. Then, out of the shadows, stepped every victim Dahmer ever killed. But their faces were stitched together, forming one massive, shifting mask. The mask spoke, tell the story, or become the next chapter. Jeremy screamed, extreme cliffhanger ending. Suddenly, the walls began to cave in. The teeth chomped down. Jeremy sprinted to the center of the room, where a book lay open on a pedestal. Its pages were blank. The watcher's voice rang out one last time. Write it. Begin the new gospel. Make me known again. Jeremy picked up the pen, and as he touched it, the ink turned to blood. Then, a hand grabbed his shoulder from behind. He turned and saw himself. Only this version was smiling, eyes glowing yellow. Welcome home, Jeremy. Jeremy stumbled into a surreal flesh-built world controlled by the Watcher, an ancient force that fed on stories, suffering, and souls. Trapped in a giant mouth surrounded by ghost-like victims of Dahmer, Jeremy was given a blood-dripping pen and commanded to write the next gospel. Before he could react, a hand grabbed his shoulder. It was himself, but smiling and with glowing yellow eyes. The other Jeremy. Jeremy stared at the glowing-eyed version of himself. Same height. Same messy hair, same torn jeans. But this one smiled like he knew how it all ended. W, were you? Jeremy stammered. The other Jeremy tilted his head, like a crow about to peck. I'm what you become if you stop running. If you give in. If you write the story they want. He nodded toward the Watcher looming above them. Its giant yellow eye never blinking. You're the ink now, the double whispered. Jeremy dropped the pen. But the moment it left his fingers, he was yanked upward, lifted into the air like a puppet on strings. The Watcher's voice boomed. Begin! The room with no exit. He was dropped hard into another room. This one was cold, metallic, and humming with electricity. He looked around. 4 walls. No windows. No doors. Nothing except a mirror. But when Jeremy looked into it, he had no reflection. Instead, the glass showed Jeffrey Dahmer pacing. He was in a prison cell, just like the one he'd been murdered in. Jeremy banged on the mirror. Stop. Why are you showing me this? The reflection Dahmer stopped pacing. He turned toward Jeremy, and he saw him. Their eyes locked. Then Dahmer smiled. You're almost ready, he mouthed. And then the mirror cracked. Blood ran from the fractures. Memory invasion. Jeremy backed away as the blood smeared across the mirror, forming a swirling portal. He had no choice but to step through it. He landed in a park. Kids were playing, people laughing. He was in Milwaukee sometime in the late 1980s. Jeremy stumbled around, confused. Why are you showing me this? A little boy ran past him, giggling. He stopped at a bench where a young man was sitting. The boy tugged his shirt. Hey, mister, want to see something cool? The man looked up. It was a young Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeremy's heart stopped. Don't go with him, he screamed at the boy. But no one heard. The scene replayed again, and again, and again, until Jeremy couldn't take it anymore. Then he turned and saw Scarver watching him from the edge of the trees. He was holding something. A hammer. The meeting of minds. Jeremy approached Scarver cautiously. You killed him. Scarver nodded. Had to. Why? Scarver's eyes locked on his. He was building something. Not just in prison, in here. He tapped his own forehead. A stairway to something dark. Jeremy shook his head. I'm not like him. Scarver tilted his head. Then why is the house rebuilding itself inside you? Jeremy looked down at his hands. The veins in his wrists were glowing yellow. He clenched his fists. I'm going to fight it. Scarver gave a sad smile. That's what I said, right before it took my soul, and wore it like a Sunday coat. Jeremy's chest tightened. "You're not real," he whispered. Scarver's face changed. His eyes turned black. "Neither are you. Not anymore." Then the hammer swung. The fracture point. Jeremy woke up again, this time in his kitchen. It was quiet. Too quiet. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. He poured water into a glass and stared at the wall. Was any of it real? He grabbed his phone to call for help. But when he looked at the screen, it wasn't his phone anymore. It was a recording of himself in the prison laundry room, covered in blood, laughing. Behind him, Dahmer lay dead, a twisted smile still on his face. Jeremy dropped the phone. It shattered. Bleeding red light. Message from the grave. The TV flickered on. Static filled the screen. Then a voice. "You can't kill a story once it's been told." It was Dahmer's voice. Then his face appeared, eyes sunken, lips cracked. "Final days, huh?" he said, as if laughing at the title of this very story. "You think I had final days? Nah, I became part of something eternal." The screen crackled. Jeremy stepped closer, heart pounding. Dahmer's face leaned in. "Finish the book, Jeremy, or you'll be stuck telling mine forever." Suddenly, the TV exploded. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the room. But written in the ash on the floor were the words. Chapter 7. The Family Revelation. Desperate for answers, Jeremy visited his childhood home. His mother answered the door. She looked exhausted, eyes red. "Mom, did Dad ever act strange before he left?" She paused. Then, quietly, he used to sleepwalk. Talked to someone in the mirror. "I thought it was stress." Jeremy's knees went weak. She continued. "After he left, I found a box filled with newspaper clippings about Dahmer, pages from his journals, a map of the prison." She walked into the closet and returned with it. Inside the box was a letter, handwritten, dated years ago. It said, "If this ends up with Jeremy, I failed. The Watcher is real. I saw what's coming. The infection isn't in the flesh. It's in the words." Jeremy stared at the handwriting. It matched the red ink scribbles on his bedroom walls. His father had known, maybe even tried to warn him, but no one listened. The book returns. That night, Jeremy returned home, and there on his kitchen table was the book again, the same one from the Watcher's mouth, still blank, except now. The title had written itself, The Untold Truth About Jeffrey Dahmer's Final Days. He opened it, and the first line had already been written in blood. It didn't end in the prison. It began with me. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the house. Jeremy grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the sound. It was coming from his basement. Extreme cliffhanger ending. Jeremy descended the stairs, the flashlight flickering. The basement door creaked open. He stepped in. The light snapped on. And there, chained to a chair, was his mother, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut. Behind her stood a tall, dark figure with yellow eyes and Dahmer's smile. He raised a scalpel. Jeremy shouted, and the figure whispered. Chapter 7 begins with a sacrifice. Then the knife came down. Jeremy's descent into madness intensified as he found himself trapped between reality and the shadowy force known as the Watcher. After learning his own father may have been tied to this dark presence, Jeremy found a chilling book titled The Untold Truth about Jeffrey Dahmer's final days. When he returned home, he discovered his mother chained in the basement, about to be sacrificed by a Dahmer-like figure with glowing yellow eyes. The blade falls. No! Jeremy screamed as the scalpel slashed downward, but instead of blood, the blade stopped midair. Frozen, the yellow-eyed figure turned slowly. Its smile widened like it had no end. Not yet, it whispered. She still remembers. Jeremy lunged forward, grabbing a rusty pipe from the basement floor. He swung. Crack! The figure's head jerked sideways, but it didn't fall. Instead, it laughed. A dry, insect-like buzz that rattled Jeremy's bones. Then it vanished, like smoke in a vacuum. Jeremy rushed to his mother. Her eyes were swollen with terror, her lips sewn shut with thick, black thread. He reached to undo the stitching. but her eyes widened. She shook her head violently. Don't. Mom, I have to help you. She knocked over a metal pan with her foot, revealing something scratched into the concrete. Let it stay shut, or they will speak through me. The journal of the forgotten father. He helped her up, her body weak and shaking, and brought her upstairs. She could barely hold a cup of water, but she managed to scribble with shaking hands on a notebook. I didn't tell you everything. About your father. About the night he disappeared. Jeremy sat down beside her. She scribbled again. Your father tried to close the doorway. What doorway? The one that lets Dahmer in. And others. The watchers. The copymen. She pointed at the book Jeremy had found. Then, out of her coat pocket, she handed him a small leather-bound journal, old, torn, and soaked with what looked like dry blood. On the front was a symbol, a circle with teeth. Inside, a message. If you're reading this, then the mouth has opened again. Don't write in the book. Don't read from it aloud. And never, ever believe what the mirror shows you. Jeremy's hands trembled. This was written by his father, a man he barely remembered, now guiding him from the grave, back to the prison. That night, Jeremy passed out on the floor beside his mother. When he awoke, he was no longer in his home. He was in the prison. But this time, he wasn't alone. Rows of cells lined both sides. And in each one, Jeffrey Dahmer. Not copies, not ghosts. Each one looked slightly different. One younger, one older, one gaunt, one smiling wide with shark-like teeth. And they all spoke in unison. You want the untold truth? The cells shook. Jeremy covered his ears, but their words wormed into his head. The final days were just the beginning. The real question isn't how I died. It's why I didn't stay dead. Suddenly, one of the Dahmers walked through the bars, like smoke through air, and stared Jeremy down. Want to know what I whispered to Scarver before he killed me? Jeremy stood frozen. Yes, he whispered. The Dahmer leaned close. I let him. The deal of silence. Then everything went black. Jeremy found himself sitting at a long wooden table, lit by a single candle. Across from him sat the Watcher. But this time, it wore a mask shaped like Jeffrey Dahmer's face. It spoke calmly. You're a writer now, Jeremy. Stories shape the world, and you've touched the sacred one, the gospel of the butcher. Jeremy spat. I'm not writing anything for you. The Watcher leaned forward. You already have. The book materialized in front of him, flipping pages on its own. And on each page, Jeremy's thoughts, dreams, fears, his memories. They were being written while he slept. No, Jeremy whispered. The Watcher offered a twisted smile. Here's the trade. You finish the story. The real one. You tell the world what really happened in Dahmer's final days. And we let your mother live. Untouched. Safe. And if I don't... The candle flickered. The Watcher replied, simply, then we feed on her screams until the ink runs dry. The letter from Scarver, back in the waking world. Jeremy rummaged through his father's journal for answers. Tucked between 2 pages was a letter addressed to the last witness. It was signed, Christopher Scarver, but the date was after his death. The letter read, Dahmer didn't beg. He didn't fight. He whispered into my ear. When the lights flicker, the walls will breathe, and the story will restart. I killed him with a steel bar, but when I turned around, he was still standing. I wasn't the first to kill Dahmer. I just made it official. Jeremy's head spun. What did that mean? Who else tried to kill Dahmer? What was he? And worse, what had Jeremy become now? The low, doubt and despair. For 3 days, Jeremy didn't leave the house. He locked the book in a safe. He burned pages of his father's journal. But nothing changed. The whispers returned. The mirror showed Dahmer dancing. The lights flickered every night at 3 a.m. His mother spoke in her sleep, still with lips sewn shut, saying, He's watching the boy. He likes how he thinks. Jeremy began to lose hope. Was he just insane? Had his trauma created hallucinations? He needed anyone, to confirm what was real. So he called the last person who ever interviewed Dahmer in prison, a journalist named Marlin. Hi, The interviewer's secret. Mara met Jeremy in a diner 3 towns over. She looked tired, worn. I wondered when someone would come. Jeremy blinked. You knew? She nodded. I interviewed him 2 weeks before he died. Or, at least, something wearing his skin. Jeremy leaned in. Mara pulled out an old cassette tape. He said things I never published. Because they weren't meant for the world. They were meant for someone else. She handed him the tape. He said, "Tell the next one. The first death was a rehearsal." Jeremy swallowed hard. She continued. And then he whispered something that chilled me to the bone. "What?" She hesitated. He said your name. Extreme cliffhanger ending. That night, Jeremy listened to the tape. Static crackled. Then a familiar voice. "Hi, Jeremy. I've been waiting. I died 3 times. None of them stuck. Want to know why? Because this story never ends until you say it does." Suddenly, Jeremy's safe began to rattle upstairs. Boom, boom, boom. He raced up the stairs. The safe burst open. The book now floated in the air, pages flipping. And from the pages, a hand emerged, long, bony, blood-soaked. It grabbed Jeremy by the throat and pulled him in. Blackness. Previously, Jeremy was yanked into the cursed book that had been writing his life as he lived it. Before the darkness swallowed him whole, a cassette tape revealed Dahmer had spoken his name years before he was even born. Now, pulled into a place beyond time and space, Jeremy finds himself face to face with the deepest secret of Jeffrey Dahmer's final days. One that was never meant to be known by the living. The pages of flesh. Jeremy awoke to silence. No sound. No air. No gravity. Just pages, miles and miles of pages, floating through an endless black sky. But they weren't ordinary pages. They were skin. Soft. Pale. Human. Some were wrinkled like the elderly. Some were tattooed. Some still had veins. Each page was etched in ink that moved like black oil, telling stories that bent his mind. One showed Dahmer kneeling before a shadowy altar. Another showed Scarver stabbing him. But Dahmer smiling. One had no image, just these words. He fed the mouth to stay alive. Jeremy floated helplessly through this library of horror until he saw it. A giant, rotting book the size of a house, standing upright on a cliff of broken bones. It had teeth along its spine, and in its center, a mouth. It breathed. It pulsed. It hungered. A voice echoed across the blackness. "Read it, Jeremy. You opened it. Now it wants your ending." The Chamber of Truth. A massive page flipped, revealing a door. Jeremy stepped through and found himself inside a prison cell. This one, though, was clean, almost holy. The walls glowed faintly gold. And on the bed sat Jeffrey Dahmer. Not the monster. Not the shadow. Just a man. Sad. Thin. Real. He looked up slowly. "You made it." Jeremy's fists clenched. "Were you?" Dahmer looked down at his hands. "I'm the first chapter. You're the last. Speak straight." Dahmer didn't flinch. "When I died, I thought it was over. But something followed me from the basement. From the bodies. From the rituals." Jeremy blinked. "Rituals?" Dahmer looked away. "I wasn't just killing them. I was trying to make something listen." He stood up, revealing a black spiral branded on his chest. I called it the mouth. The mouth of memory. It eats stories, then replays them. Jeremy's voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" Dahmer walked closer. "Because I wanted to be remembered, even if it was as a monster. The deal that bound them." Dahmer pulled something from under his mattress. A key made of bone. I offered the mouth my memories. My crimes. I told it every detail of what I did. And it fed. Jeremy stepped back. "You made a deal?" Dahmer nodded. "In exchange, it gave me something no one else got." "What?" Dahmer smiled faintly. "Replays. I died in prison. But the mouth let me come back. Just long enough to do it again. Differently. Sometimes the victims escape. Sometimes I cry. Sometimes I repent. But always, he said, I return to the moment I die. Jeremy's blood ran cold. That's why there are so many of you. The other Dahmers in the cells, they're all me, different versions, different edits of the same story. Dahmer handed Jeremy the bone key. You're here because the mouth is tired of my chapters. It wants yours. Lo, the first rewrite. Suddenly, Jeremy fell backward, straight through the prison wall, and landed back in his own bedroom, breathing hard, drenched in sweat. The book was gone. The safe was empty. The whispers were gone, too. Was it over? He ran downstairs. His mother sat in the kitchen, smiling. No stitches, no bruises. Good morning, sweetheart. Jeremy froze. You're okay. She nodded. Why wouldn't I be? He looked around. Everything looked normal. No signs of the watcher. No haunted mirror. No tape. No burned journal. He opened the front door. The sky was too blue. Birds chirped. The mailman waved. It was perfect. Too perfect. He turned on the TV. A breaking news segment played. Jeffrey Dahmer was never caught. He now lives peacefully in Florida as a retired taxidermist. Jeremy dropped the remote. This wasn't real. Extreme. When the mirror bled, he ran to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. At first, it was his reflection. Then, his reflection blinked twice, then smiled. But Jeremy hadn't. He took a step back. His reflection stayed. It didn't follow him. It leaned in, then softly. I already started writing your next chapter. Suddenly, blood oozed from the edges of the mirror, dripping like syrup. Jeremy screamed. He smashed the mirror, but instead of shattering, it rippled like water. A hand reached through, not Dahmer's, his own. The reflection was pulling him in. Previously, Jeremy learned the horrifying truth. Jeffrey Dahmer had made a deal with being known only as the mouth of memory. In exchange for immortality through endless rewrites of his life and death, Dahmer gave the mouth all his memories and crimes. But now, the mouth wants new chapters, and it has chosen Jeremy as its next author. After breaking free, Jeremy found himself in a perfect version of his life, too perfect, until his reflection began moving on its own, reached through a bleeding mirror, and dragged him into the darkness once more. Into the mirror. Jeremy was yanked into the glass like it was jelly. His body stretched and snapped. He couldn't scream. No air, no time, no gravity. Then impact. He hit Coldstone hard. The place smelled like rust fire and something worse, rot. He was inside a mirror world. Every surface shimmered with ghostly reflections, but none of them matched reality. Instead of his reflection, he saw others, children screaming, men with their mouths sewn shut, women walking backwards, all trapped, all looping, and far in the center, spinning like a carousel, was a massive book. It rotated slowly in midair, its pages made of skin, glowing softly. Beneath it stood the mouth, a writhing, shadowy thing with hundreds of limbs and no eyes. Just an enormous, grinning mouth filled with turning, whispering tongues. Jeremy felt it in his chest. The mouth wasn't just watching him. It was reading him. The scribe's hall. A voice echoed, soft and high-pitched, like a child whispering in his ear. Write or be rewritten. A pedestal rose in front of Jeremy. On it, a feathered pen, and a scroll of skin stretched out like a tongue. It had one sentence on it. Jeffrey Dahmer lives again through Jeremy. Jeremy backed away. No. The mouth's lips curled back, revealing rows of nails, pins, and broken teeth. The scroll grew longer. Blood spilled from the edges of the letters as more words appeared. Jeremy, whose life was a footnote, now begins his chapter as a new collector. He screamed and tried to rip the scroll, but it wrapped around his arms like a snake, binding him in place. A voice, his own, began whispering. You've been forgotten, Jeremy. This is the only way they'll remember you. They'll whisper your name like they whispered his. Be someone. Be remembered. Be him. Lo, the last resistance. Jeremy dropped to his knees. He thought of his mom, of the real world, of the laughter before all this horror. I'm not like him, he whispered. The mouth's tongues hissed. You already are. You opened the door. You asked the questions. You wanted the truth. I wanted to stop him, then end the story. The mouth roared, shaking the ground. Jeremy closed his eyes. He pictured fire. He pictured the journal burning in the backyard. He pictured writing his own story his way. I'm not your ending, he said. I'm the final chapter. The mouth screeched. The scroll snapped in half. Jeremy grabbed the feathered pen and drove it into the ground. A shock wave of ink exploded in every direction. The mirror world shattered. Extreme. The real Dahmer stands again. Jeremy blinked and found himself back in the prison hallway. The real one. The first one. But something was different. Every door was wide open. The cells were empty. Every version of Dahmer gone. He walked, heart pounding, until he reached the last cell. And there he was, Jeffrey Dahmer, alive, not aged, not changed, just sitting on the bed, smiling. I knew you'd come back, Dahmer said. I didn't write this, Jeremy whispered. No, Dahmer said, standing. I did. He pulled out a second feathered pen. Even the mouth has a master, he said. I used you to escape. You burned my past, so now I can write a new one. Jeremy stepped back. You tricked me. Dahmer laughed. Of course I did. He raised the pen like a knife. Now it's time for your chapter to end. Previously, after escaping the mouth of memory, Jeremy finds himself back in the prison where it all began. But nothing is the same. The cells are empty, and at the end of the hall sits a very alive Jeffrey Dahmer, holding the same pen that binds reality to the story. Dahmer reveals that he has tricked Jeremy all along, used him as a final key to rewrite his own existence. Now, he lifts the feathered pen like a weapon, ready to end Jeremy's chapter. Now, the ending writes back. Jeffrey lunged. The pen gleamed like glass, shimmering with black ink that dripped and vanished in midair. Jeremy ducked. The pen slammed into the wall behind him, not piercing it, but instead writing words onto it like a quill on paper. Jeremy fell. Suddenly, Jeremy was on the floor. His legs collapsed beneath him like jelly. He hadn't tripped. He was written to fall. See, Dahmer whispered, twirling the pen. We're all just ink and story, Jeremy. Even you. Jeremy gritted his teeth and crawled backward. No, he spat. You don't control me anymore. I don't need control, Dahmer said, stepping forward. Just permission, and you gave it to me when you burned the journal. You gave me the fire to rise again. Jeremy's hands trembled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the original journal he had kept hidden, his journal. Not Dahmer's, not the mouth's, just his words, his truth, his memories, the real story. Then let's see who the story listens to, Jeremy said. He slammed the journal on the ground, opened to the last blank page, and wrote, Jeffrey Dahmer pause. And just like that, Dahmer froze in place, eyes wide, pen trembling. Jeremy flipped the page. His hand moved fast. Jeffrey Dahmer's lives began to burn from the inside out. Smoke hissed from Dahmer's mouth. He screamed as ink poured from his eyes. No, he roared. This is my story. But Jeremy wasn't done. He turned to the next page and wrote what no one ever had the courage to. Jeffrey Dahmer's final days were not a mystery. They were a trap he set, yes, but one that turned against him. Suddenly, the entire hallway rippled. The world warped. Bars reappeared. The cell slammed shut. And from every one of them, the shadows returned. All the souls of those Dahmer had taken. They stepped out slowly, not screaming, not angry, just present. One by one, they surrounded him, and they began to whisper, not forgotten, not erased, not yours. Dahmer collapsed. Ink poured from his mouth like tar. He reached for Jeremy one last time. Help me? But Jeremy turned the final page of the journal and wrote, the story ends now. The world returns. Jeremy woke up in his bed. For real. No mirror. No shadows. No journals. Just sunlight. He ran to the mirror. His reflection smiled back. Normal. He checked the news. No strange reports. No missing pages in Time. Jeffrey Dahmer remained dead, buried in history. No signs of supernatural returns. Just silence and peace. But late that night, Jeremy sat on his porch. He looked up at the stars and heard something, a faint whisper, not near his ear, not even in the air, but in his mind. The mouth is still hungry. He stared at the stars and noticed one of them blinked just once, like an eye, watching, waiting. He went back inside, pulled out the journal. It was blank, clean, no writing, no blood, no history, but the pen sat beside it, feathered, shimmering, waiting, and on the cover, a single word had appeared. Sequel,